He suddenly realized how impressive Maestro was in a fight, to force him to have such thoughts. Regardless of how talented he was, though, the Magister Patriarch was regarded as the #1 master combat strategist wizard in the Empire. His remote meditative guidance in the storm of chaos had proven the downfall of Archaon recently. One of the major reasons the Ever-Chosen's attack wasn't as strongly supported at the other walls as it should have been. More pressure on the other walls would have diverted defenders to spread thinner. The Patriarch had his plan now. It was just a matter of picking the right moment to execute it. Before he could, though, his invisible wall shimmered and evaporated in front of him. Maestro had no idea where the Patriarch was. His silent spell would have faded by now, and he knew counterattack was imminent. The younger wizard came to a decision, casting a spell towards the ceiling. Something about it interacted with the stars that were part of the astrologically themed paintwork, making them shine brighter than they ever should until their glow emanated down into the room for quite a way around them in a large circle of effect. Suddenly, a shimmering of nothingness and somethingness tussling for existence over the same spot drew Maestro's eye as he spoke those words quietly to himself with intrigue. The wind vortex stopped at last as Maestro thanked his lucky stars, then chortled at the joke he'd accidentally made. This momentary lapse in concentration was all it took for him to lose sight of the Patriarch once more. Suddenly, from behind a pillar to the side, the older wizard stepped out swinging his staff skillfully. Maestro only just raised his own wooden staff in time to block the attack that was aimed for his throat. The old man pressed the attack and Maestro was immediately on the defensive, parrying and blocking as best as he could. He brought his staff high at one end and low at the other, fending off every upper body attack from the old man. The Patriarch swept low suddenly and dragged his staff around in a low arc. Maestro had the sense to jump over it, but as he landed, the old man's follow-up leg sweep made contact, sending Maestro sprawling onto his back. As Maestro tried to get back up, the Patriarch pointed his finger towards Maestro's staff, and it flew out of his momentarily weakened grip, across the room, clattering some distance away against a far-off pillar. The Patriarch quickly brought his staff down on Maestro's shoulder, and he felt that arm go dead. Maestro took a step back, getting ready to grab the next lunge, but the old man simply cast a lightning bolt. It was at an alarmingly close proximity. Maestro didn't even have time to scream, as he was sent flying backwards across the room. As he hit the polished floor, he kept sliding along on his back. Maestro felt a familiar power source coming up on his left at any moment. He reached out and grabbed his staff back again as he kept on sliding. The bolt of lightning had been massive. His hair was singed and more of it had turned grey in 2 places, although he didn't know that yet. His body ached with the burnt feeling. His senses had been fried, and he had been subjected to such pain the like of which he had never felt before. His face was blackened, worse towards the lower jaw and chin. One piece of his long hair that ran down the side was actually on fire. He only realised that when he smelt the smoke and quickly waved and patted it to put out the miniature blaze before it could catch his head on fire, or so he thought. Maestro commented aloud, "I can't afford to be hit by one of those again, or it will blast me to high heavens." "Hoo-ha! I made a joke there without realising." The Patriarch's stern face came into view once more, through Maestro's blurring eyes that were straining to correct themselves amidst the irritating smoke that poured up from his robes. Maestro fired a magical dart at the old man, which he knocked aside with ease, with a swipe from the back of his hand. Maestro desperately fired another bolt of electricity from his fingertips. The shocking blue etheric bolt struck the ground where the old master had been standing, but he was nowhere to be seen. Maestro considered the possibility that he had disintegrated from the attack, but threw that idea aside as being silly. As the younger man looked around trying to find the Patriarch's location, a sudden, crackling, splitting sound above him made him look up. An etheric thundercloud had gathered overhead, much larger than anything he had ever seen, let alone created. He started to run, but the effects of the lightning storm were far and wide, as far as his eyes could see about the room. The air around him was positively charged, and within moments a bolt of lightning was bound to hit him. He had to think fast. He supercharged the metal fastenings that were shaped like sharpened talons at the tip of his staff, their purpose to hold his cobalt-coloured power stone in place at the end. Once the metal had started to glow with a positive charge, he threw the staff up into the air. It penetrated the storm cloud and pushed back out of it, remaining levitated in the air. The positive charge in his staff was just enough to keep the positively charged lightning bolts from striking down on him, while he remained below the staff. A single thunderclap of applause rang out through the great room of contests. The Patriarch's voice was loud, coming from all directions at once. "Very impressive work, Maestro! You are a genius! Just think, if we had never made you leave to find your life outside of this city, you never would have discovered just how brilliant you were." Those words were of little comfort to Maestro right now, for he knew that the old man still meant to do him harm. Maestro had to rely on his electrostatic repulsion effect above and wait for the next move. Suddenly his spectacles cracked on the left side. He took them off and threw them away, reaching into a sack inside his backpack, where he pulled out another pair. After quickly examining them, he put them on, commenting, "Ah, my mountain climbing spectacles! Well, these will just have to do!" to no one in particular. The different spectacles that Maestro wore for seemingly eccentric uses were a topic of some debate throughout even the wizards' collegiate community. Maestro would procure, or steal, lenses from the Celestial College's telescopes and use his own talents of engineering to create different spectacles. It was argued by some that perhaps Maestro's belief that the spectacles were improving a particular area of his sight was enough for them to seemingly work, for him at least. Another argument held that, due to the magical nature of the objects the glass was removed from, surely there was a chance that each was somehow imbued with some otherworldly property. Whatever the reason was, nobody ever seemed to conclude that he should be punished for theft and vandalism to the college telescopes. Maestro could not see the Patriarch, but the great wizard lord recited a spell under his breath and quickly levitated off the ground. He continued to float up as high as he could. The Patriarch's disembodied voice rang out again. "You have given up your staff. Now how will you defend yourself, student?" Maestro's face became grim. He reached his hand behind his lower back, gripping the handle of his sword, keeping it firmly sheathed for the time being. Maestro had stared at the Patriarch for long enough during the encounter to now recognize his unique effects on the ether around them. Before, it had been impossible to identify, for the Aesir had all looked the same, but he was now almost completely sure that the old man's presence had a unique trail leading to it. He decided to trust his own guess, and he quickly searched the room, looking not with his eyes, but with his newly honed witch sight. Everywhere he scanned, the energy readings of Aesir was erratic, but none matched the particular erratic pattern that belonged to the Patriarch. How was this possible? He had no idea. It could only mean that the old man had either left the room, or he was no longer around him at all. It quickly dawned on Maestro that the old man couldn't be on the floor, and so had to be above him. Maestro drew his sword, River's Edge. The handle was interlaced with bands of thick, durable rubber that wrapped around a khaki-coloured gripping cloth of fine material. The handle at first seemed like any other blade, but drips of water made the floor wet, and within moments a torrent of water was running up and down the blade like the motion of a chainsaw. Maestro could hear the loud and purposeful recital of a silence spell again, as he concentrated his own willpower on the sword he held. The length of it started to adjust, with it growing in size due to the water itself stretching out further. The metal itself could not grow. Maestro knew that the Patriarch must have used a Wings of Heaven spell to levitate above the greyish-black thundercloud and hide out of view, so that he could snipe Maestro with a combination silence spell, then blast him freely. It would all be over very soon, he thought. He cast a lightning bolt spell just as the silencing effect hit him. This time, the commanding presence inside his head was too strong. The will of the old man was absolute. He strained to fight it, but his own tongue suddenly felt like a lead weight. He had finished the spell in time, but did not manage to weave it into an outward attacking bolt. It remained trapped in his hands, where it reabsorbed elsewhere, as a spell like this always would if not unleashed quickly enough, as it was a natural element that of course could only behave as a natural element could. Maestro fancied that his mountain climbing spectacles would give him the edge at perceiving movement from above him. The bifocal element on the glass indeed was placed on the upper part of the lens for starters. Maestro suddenly saw what he was waiting for. The Patriarch's mighty lightning bolt that tore through the cloud from the other side and came rapidly towards him. Maestro raised River's Edge so that its watery point connected with the lightning bolt first. The watery sword had been negatively charged by the failed lightning spell from Maestro before. The bolt that had made contact was positively charged. The Patriarch stared in disbelief as the lightning erupted and burnt on the surface of the water, and in an instant a counter-charge from the water's current jumped back through the lightning, which led right back into the Patriarch's fingers. There was a massive electrical crackling sound, followed immediately by an explosion. The Patriarch fell from the sky, through the cloud, and hit the floor. Maestro ran over to the Supreme Wizard Lord and placed River's Edge to the man's throat. The Patriarch's fingers were black as soot, and his hands were burned. "I concede to you," he said. Maestro sheathed the sword at once. The droplets that had escaped onto the floor quickly made their way in reverse back into the sheath too, just before the sword's hilt locked the opening off. At once, several attendants appeared and pulled the Patriarch back onto his feet. He stared at Maestro in disbelief, stating, "I would not have believed it, lest I saw it with my own eyes. You are now a Magister. You shall now be known as a Sir of our order." Maestro smiled and said, "Oh, good. That means I can concentrate on some other pursuits next, like, getting back to my engineering." Yes, said the Patriarch, a little shakily in his voice. "There is that. Now that you are a Magister, you may define what sort of further title you have. There have been Master Engineers before, indeed. The final rank for you to attain, Lord, will still be some way off. Your depth of comprehension will still need to grow. So I give you permission from now to study whatever you see fit." Maestro punched the air in triumph. At last, he thought. At least he had conquered fate's plan. He realized he'd said that last part out loud when the Supreme Lord Patriarch answered, "How do you know that this wasn't the plan all along?" Maestro gulped at the enormity of such a suggestion. He quickly pushed that down, though, and asked, "You said you would tell me why I have been treated differently all these years." The Patriarch sighed. "Indeed, yes, I suppose I did. Well, Maestro, have you ever heard the stories of Supreme Wizard Lord Wilhelm?" Maestro thought for a moment and then replied, "Ah, yes, one of the only humans to actually master high magic." Magic in its purest form was normally only controllable by the elves. It was called high magic. Evil wizards and mages would often channel a near variant of high magic called Dar. This negative form of high magic was the pure stuff of chaos, unrefined, undisciplined, and unmetered. All magic in itself originated from the chaos dimensions. Users of Dar were those who wanted the fast track to power. Such magic was near the level of the elves for little effort at all, but it carried a whole host of new dangers as a result as well. Practitioners of these dark arts would often go insane or be subject to a fate far, far worse than that. Humans were not anywhere near gifted enough to use high magic. Their only path to access was Dar, which explained why necromancy and chaos magic was rife amongst mortals, who had turned their backs on the Empire and its lawful-minded neighbouring countries.